Avengers Infinity War may very well be the proof that no matter how many characters and storylines are featured in a movie, there's still a way to create an almost coherent plotline. There's many naysayers who are declaring the end of the comic book movie craze, including directors who for some reason believe there's a blooming Avatar craze. This movie puts a lot of that to rest. Avengers Infinity War may be the most anticipated film of 2018, but I almost forgot about it being released. It could be because the release date was pushed up a week into April at the last second, but it's probably because most of my hype was for Black Panther, still my favorite film to be released this year. However, after seeing the flick, maybe all that low hype made for a better experience, or maybe it's just a good movie because I can say I enjoyed Avengers Infinity War immensely. But I still find almost half of the other cinematic universe films to be better, including Black Panther and the other 3 films released in 2017, plus the masterpiece that is Civil War. I feared that there would be too many characters and too many separate plot lines, a lot of which must be excused because I felt that these Avengers films are a celebration of some sort, like a giant party for characters who we love to come together and interact. It's an experience for the big screen. I thought that about the first 2 Avengers films. There's a lot of good conflict and action, but nothing really develops our characters since most of it is saved for individual films. Infinity War is similar to the other Avengers films, especially Age of Ultron, where there's just so much going on. Some people were beginning to complain, but Age of Ultron does improve with every viewing since it manages to have a tiny bit of character development and change. Infinity War has the problem of too much going on, but it develops its characters into overdrive. Well, some of them anyway. It's pretty obvious which characters the film is focusing on and which ones are just there. Black Panther, Captain America, Spider-Man, Black Widow, and War Machine all seem to sit to the wayside for other characters, even second string characters like Rocket, Gamora, Scarlet Witch, and Vision. And you know what? It's actually awesome. Characters who haven't really gotten their day in the sun get their moment here, and while I wish some of those other characters would get more screen time, there's almost an understanding that there's another film coming out next year, so maybe they'll get more screen time then, plus we still have the individual films. I've never been a fan of splitting a movie into 2, but that doesn't seem to be the case here. There is a cliffhanger, but there's also at least 3 acts to make up an entire individual story, and it gets me excited for the next one. We don't really get a movie that ends this way anymore. People almost constantly compare sequels to The Empire Strikes Back, but this is a case where the comparison is perfect. This film might wreck you at the end because it did for me. It doesn't have that same kind of splitting the movie into 2 syndrome that something like Deathly Hallows has. This is its own movie. At this point, I'm gonna go into spoilers, so if you haven't seen it yet, stop the video here, okay? Got it? Alright. I'm just going to talk about the movie through each character since that's what I find most compelling about these movies. They create just good characters. It was good to see Thor back almost immediately after Ragnarok, and he gets a spectacular amount of screen time. It makes for a good continuation of the last Thor movie, but honestly, it seems weird that he got over Loki's death so fast. I think Loki is probably dead for good, but I wish the death would have been executed a little better, but hey, maybe it'll crush the souls of his biggest fans. I also found his little journey to get an axe to not be too interesting. It's good to see Thor, but his storyline overall got a little boring. I enjoyed Star-Lord for the most part, even though he just seemed like a caricature of himself, until he finds out Gamora is dead, which is when Chris Pratt really nails the part. Gamora and Star-Lord's relationship is more compelling in this film than it ever has been before. Gamora even gets a great arc and good development, which I loved since she's been my least favorite part of the Guardians group. In fact, I'd say she's probably the best character in this film. She has a motive and a center, and it doesn't seem like she's just there to be another pawn in fan service. She actually has a huge part in the villain's plan. Thanos is someone who could have easily been a letdown, given that he's been built up since the first Avengers flick. But you know what? I liked him. He has a similar motive to Killmonger, except less sympathetic. In fact, there's zero sympathy to be there. Thanos is demented, but you see how killing Gamora crushes him. I don't think it makes him more relatable, but it's weird to see an all-powerful being like this actually have an emotional core, even if it's very little. I like that he messed with audience expectations and actually had more emotion rather than just being a giant brute. I even like that it's difficult for him to get all the Infinity Stones. Other films like Deathly Hallows will start rushing through the subsequent items because the film is running out of time. But here, it takes time to figure out the puzzle for each stone. Josh Brolin does a great job with what's basically supposed to be a boring villain, and he actually makes him enjoyable. He's not humorous or badass, he's just commanding. He's no Killmonger or Ego, but he works for what little material is there. Except his henchmen really felt like the bargain bin of DC films. A lot of them had a Steppenwolf look to them, and it really felt out of place. In fact, to compare to Justice League even more, I was disappointed by the size of the film. Not in terms of cast or effects, but in terms of world ending. You only ever see New York and devastation, but after that, nothing. Everything is secluded to our main characters until the Wakanda ending. I guess the movie's budget had to go towards the actors and how many of them there are, but come on, at least some citizen reaction to global catastrophes would be cool. It's exactly the same problem Justice League had. There's nothing about the world that makes it seem like it's ending. I just never really believed that this was a world-ending event. But speaking of Wakanda, it's great to see Black Panther again. He has very little to do here, but it's pretty understandable since there was just an entire Black Panther film a couple months ago. I don't know what it'll be like watching this a couple years down the line when all these movies are watched at different points, but a lot of the extras from that film show up, like his sister and his fighting partner, so that was cool. Captain America is hardly in the film, and I wish there was a little more detail into the after effects of Civil War and the Accords, but whatever, I guess General Ross shows up for a minor cameo to explain stuff quick. I wanted more Captain America, and I felt that Chris Evans almost seemed bored in the movie. I know, it's kinda harsh of me to say that, but that's how I felt. The same goes for Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, they just seemed tired. Falcon and War Machine are barely in the film, but they're having a good time, and they have a couple of good lines. I guess Bucky really gets tossed to the side though, but even he gets a great scene in Wakanda and with Rocket. Benedict Cumberbatch, on the other hand, seems very lively since doing Doctor Strange in 2016, so it was great to see him be a huge support to the cast, and his similarities to Tony Stark definitely played out well. It was good to see him interact with other characters too, like Peter Quill and Peter Parker. Wong is back too, not for long though, he's in it just about as much as Pepper Potts is. Very minor, but charming. Mark Ruffalo is trying his hardest with the limited role of Bruce Banner, and I'll always love seeing him no matter what. He gave a lot of levity to some of the action scenes, and it was cool to see this variation on the Hulk, which essentially means he never becomes a Hulk. It's interesting to see something like that. Peter Parker was his basic self, but an excellent way to continue his role from Spider-Man Homecoming. I love the dynamic between him and Tony. It makes for the saddest scene in the film, which, man, I just gotta give huge props to Tom Holland. He owns this role. I thought Robert Downey Jr. did his best work since the first Iron Man in the last Captain America film, but he's still doing an always commendable job here. He's not the heart of the story, and gets just about as much screen time as Thor, but you get the pain he's feeling and the conflict he's having since the original Avengers film, and how it all impacts him. There's a shocking scene where he's stabbed, and I pretty much gasped. I thought that was it. I thought he was done for. In any case, the film really builds off the bones of Iron Man 3 and Civil War and how his character is always evolving, so it's interesting to see where he'll go next, seeing that he's one of the last to survive. But real quick, I did kinda hate his suit. I like that each film since the first Iron Man has evolved the suit in interesting and believable ways, but here, his and Spider-Man's suits almost seem invincible. It's a little too much to accept, but they make up for it by having all the characters work together and actually put to use their unique abilities, rather than just simply bashing random stuff like in other crossovers like this. Rocket and Groot were just kind of there in the film. They were funny, but Rocket only ever got interesting when he was playing off of Thor. An interesting but satisfying camaraderie. Peter Dinklage is in the film as a giant dwarf. I kind of wish they would have introduced this stuff in another movie and maybe not use someone so high profile, but then again, they use actors like Chris Pratt and Benedict Cumberbatch now, so who am I kidding? It was a random detour, and it's probably something I will complain less about in a second viewing, kind of like the casino scene in the recent Star Wars film, but yeah, this whole scene kind of seemed really pointless. Nebula shows up, and she doesn't really do much for the story at all, but it's good to see her. An aspect I loved in Civil War was this sort of hidden romance between Scarlet Witch and Vision, and it only improves here. In fact, it becomes tear-jerking at times. Then there's Mantis, who's just kind of there, and Drax, who is still funny as ever, but only used when necessary. I was disappointed that Paul Rudd never shows up, or Jeremy Renner, or Captain America's girlfriend, or Jon Favreau, or Captain Marvel, even though it's hinted at, or any of the TV characters like Coulson, Luke Cage, Daredevil, Jessica Jones. I mean, what are they all up to? I get why they're not in the movies, but it's a pretty gaping plot hole now. I'd maybe care less if they didn't have Red Skull, not portrayed by Hugo Weaving, show up after 7 years. What a strange bit of fan service to have a character like that show up and not only be distracting, but kind of ruin what could have been an extremely emotional death scene. I would cry about Gamora dying, much like I did when Star-Lord found out about her death from Thanos, ruining the plan and causing a domino effect which ended the world. But instead, I'm looking at this Hugo Weaving lookalike, so random and pointless. The movie can fail at times with its cinematography. Maybe I'm getting spoiled with the likes of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Thor Ragnarok and how those are so colorful and well shot. There's good looking shots here and there, but overall the color palette is going back to that desaturated look of the first Avengers and the last two Captain America films. Maybe that's just the style the Russo brothers like, but even the action scenes don't seem as well thought out. Maybe they're growing tired of action, and don't worry, most of the films have amazing conversations and flashbacks that make up for the generic action, but the overall look of the film is, I have to say it, it's just not appealing to look at. And besides, some of the characters being reduced to one personality, I think the film doesn't juggle many storylines that well. It reminded me of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, where we'll leave a storyline for almost 20 to 30 minutes at times, only to return and forget about what's happening, and a movie like this needs to make these scenes paced better. It's probably the best this movie could have done just based on the nature of a product like this, but I still felt confused at times, really needing time to reset my brain for other characters. And it's a shame that there's an entire storyline featuring characters that don't get much screen time. The Captain America group is only comprised of characters that are hardly in the film, beyond Wanda and Vision, so it just seems really slow. There's definitely a lot to love about this movie. Any complaints really come down to the same complaints I had with Age of Ultron, but it was too much to love for me to want to ever cut anything out. The way this film differs from Age of Ultron is that it actually has a very satisfying third act that evolves the characters and takes a direction I haven't seen in this universe yet. I love the characters and the emotion. I love the cliffhanger and the villain. I love the evolving mythology and the unique ways these superheroes use their powers. It has the side effects of having too much going on, and I wonder how a movie like this will work beyond a theatrical experience, but the third act emotion was so heavy that it almost makes it the best act to come out of these Avengers films. I guess technically the first film is still the best, but in the end it's really just a simplistic, satisfying blockbuster. I thought the latter two films did more with the characters, and the third film actually took chances. It made emotional impacts with lesser known characters and evolved the story, and while it may have a lot of detours and a lot of stuff going on, it's pretty memorable. There's tons of good lines and scenes, and that's what these Avengers films are supposed to be. Just a great barrage of humor, characters, and story. And with that emotional impact and cliffhanger, it manages to get me excited for the next installment. Time will tell if these films will work on their own or if these were just meant for the theater, but for now I'm going to say that this film is definitely worth seeing. Thanks for watching the video. I'm now on Patreon, so if you want to get early access to content, request reviews, or just have your name stapled on the end credits of videos, then go ahead and check it out. Thanks for your support.